Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. Full 2 weeks into April now, and a full 2 weeks into our April hibernation as well. We continue in lockdown. The Republicans continue to whisper among themselves about their plans, maybe sort of, kind of, depending on who's being asked and how close Donald Trump is to them when they're being asked, talking about reopening the economy by May 1st. Now another one of those stupid artificial deadlines that don't make any sense. The first one being Easter has come and gone. The next one under discussion is by May, which might mean May 1st, or might mean, I don't know, could mean May 31st, I suppose, would be a slightly more realistic goal. Let's see. We saw that one asked about yesterday, specifically to Stephen Mnuchin, who took the microphone briefly during yesterday's, what shall we say, humdinger of a press conference, I guess. By most accounts, the worst one yet. Certainly the worst one since the very last one that he had, which was previously the worst one yet, and then so on and so on and so on. The deterioration continues, pardon me, as I deteriorate before your very, ears, I suppose. In the morning, I guess there's just nothing you can do, no matter how hard you prepare to get ready for this thing. The home recording studio thing. What can you do? Anyway, unhinged as usual. Press conference yesterday, by most accounts, one of his worst meltdowns yet. We could go over it line by line, but I think you've probably seen the most important parts of it, which would include his essential declaration, of the Nixon doctrine writ large, I guess. The idea that basically the president, in his mind, while he's president, of course this isn't the case when other people are president, but while he's president, the president has the authority to do anything of any kind, anywhere, anytime that he might like, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop him. This was in response to the question of, you keep talking about, whatever this means, reopening the economy. And by the way, the economy is relatively, for a pandemic, relatively open, I would say. A lot of people, of course, got laid off from their jobs. Some for no reason whatsoever. Others directly, of course, because of the pandemic. I have a feeling that a lot of companies took advantage of the opportunity to, publicly traded companies anyway, and I guess privately owned companies too, looking to reduce their payroll, probably took advantage of the opportunity to lay a bunch of people off in what they figure is a no-blame period. But a lot of people out of work, to be sure, a lot of people still working. Certainly large swaths of the economy could be doing a lot better. Some are entirely shut down, I suppose. But, really honestly, there's a lot more of the economy still at work than I thought might be the case during the pandemic. And I don't know whether Donald Trump is clinging to the idea that there's no economic activity going on whatsoever, and therefore it's not his fault that the economy is tanking. And maybe you don't even think that it is, because you don't attribute the economic performance of the country to any president, good or bad. Might be one of those people, and just being consistent now, I don't know. Anyway, a hell of a press conference yesterday. So he was asked about the idea that he could order the economy back open, whatever that means, despite the fact that most of all of the stay-at-home orders and whatever has substituted for stay-at-home orders in states where they either don't want to use that terminology but have done much the same thing or are resisting the idea still. There are such states. All of this has been ordered by the governors, which is within the traditional understanding, I think, of the way things have worked. Although I think at this point we all probably looked to the presidency for some kind of hint that there would be a coordinated national response where the president, if they didn't believe that they had the authority to order either a shutdown or a reopening of the economy, would strongly urge the governors of the various states and territories to do what they've done, to shut down. And I'm sure that Trump probably believes he did that. Of course, he really did the opposite. At any rate, the question was, well, what happens, how will you reopen the economy given the fact that the governors are the ones by whose authority the economy in the several states and territories are closed? And what if one or more of the states says we're not ready and we're simply not going to reopen, if they disagree with your assessment? And Trump did answer the second part. He might have answered it first by saying, well, that's not likely to happen. Everyone wants to get back, and that may be true. Everyone wants to get back to work. Everyone wants to reopen, so nobody's going to say no. That part, not necessarily so true, depending on what date and what conditions Trump puts on his purported order to reopen. But the more important part, I thought, and I think everybody probably would agree, was when Trump asserted that there was really no possibility that any state could resist. Not only that they wouldn't resist, but that they couldn't resist because the authority of the president in this area, or as he put it, this subject that we're discussing, because he couldn't really put a term to it. But the president, the authority of the president here is total. It's absolute. In other words, he can order everything switched on or off by himself, by his own authority. Governor's authority, in fact, doesn't exist to do this. He went on to explain that, yes, while it was true that mostly governors had shut down their economies or whatever by state, while this was the case, this was not to be mistaken for the absence of the president's authority to do exactly the same thing. And in fact, that all of these governors acted essentially by presidential authority because, as he said, I let them shut down by state. I didn't order them to do it, but I didn't stand in the way. I liked what they were doing. I thought it was the right thing, and I didn't say they couldn't do it. I let them do it. It was a very, real interesting moment. Half narcissism, half, I guess, that vibe when people make mistakes and say, I meant to do that. That's the way I wanted it. I meant for that to happen. It was really interesting watching him do that, to say the very least, and watching the reporters' response to it. There was some good pushback from some of the reporters. I still think probably on the whole it was best not to, would have been best not to air the whole thing. I feel a little bit hypocritical about it because I did want to watch after a while. I didn't start off watching, mostly have given up on that. And largely because it's just too infuriating, more so than that nothing is happening at them. But, there was definitely a clear signal from Twitter very early on. Hey, this one is different in kind and the meltdown is greater in magnitude. Maybe you should take a look at this. So I suppose in the end, I guess we say, well, I guess I'm glad it was on some channel. It might be wise to handle it as I do, because, I'm a pretty wise guy, I'm guessing. Anyway, I watch it on C-SPAN, and I've been turning to C-SPAN because I figured that flipping around to the networks wouldn't help me because they were all going to stop airing these dangerous live fests, but apparently they haven't done that yet. At least some of the cable networks haven't done that anyway. I don't know about the broadcast networks, but you could leave it to C-SPAN. They will cover it. And then you can say, all right, well, the basic function of coverage has been fulfilled here. And if the rest of you want to cut away or not show the thing because it's just dangerous and full of lies and could actually kill people, then that would be okay. Anyway, it was a real weird one yesterday. There were also some good fights, as I said. And who was it that was particular? Was it Paula Reed? Is that her name? CBS reporter had a interesting struggle with the president and proved her mettle in terms of not being willing to back down or hide from the questioning or stop asking questions that she wasn't done stating simply because the president was interrupting them. That's his favorite tactic. When he can see that questioning is hostile or going to take a turn against him, he jumps in and begins to talk right over the reporter. And sometimes I think, I don't know, I guess the microphones are sort of set up there to give him, the primacy there. So he can talk over the reporters. And if the reporters ignore it, and refuse to play along with the "I've interrupted you, so therefore you have to stop because I'm the president and you're just a person" game, he then actually will say, excuse me, and in the fashion that we are conditioned to understand as a person asserting their right to speak over a rude person who is interrupting them, even though he's the one interrupting the reporter. The reporter is speaking first. The question hasn't been stated. For him to begin answering and then say, excuse me, I'm speaking here. It's a remarkable play, but it largely it's largely worked against the White House press corps. Don't know that it's entirely their fault. Well, for one thing, we're conditioned to understand this kind of interaction in a certain way, and we gravitate towards that. Secondly, it's been the tradition that we elect relatively competent and distinguished people as president of the United States, and so there's some reason to believe that when the president of the United States insists on being heard, there's something worth hearing that isn't total garbage or could get people killed or is a narcissistic rage defense or something like that. But that's not the case anymore. And I also think, as I said, with the way the microphones are set up in there, and I do think that this White House takes advantage of that. I mean, I've seen them in various press conference settings, particularly the ones that take place outside and in the Rose Garden, use microphone control to actually shut down a line of questioning, either turning the microphone off, taking the microphone away from reporters who are asking questions. It's more difficult to do in the press room because they don't typically rely on, and I guess maybe the reporters aren't mic'd. That's another thing. I suppose each network has their own mic on each reporter. So, for instance, when CBS was covering her questioning, they had a nice clear feed of her of her question. But otherwise, you just rely on that sort of echoey, generalized microphone capturing of the sound inside the room. So it's very easy for the president to talk over them because the booming microphone response of the president drowns them out. But it was an interesting exchange between the two of them. There were two, as a matter of fact, and both of them, I think, were worth watching. I think, let me roll back. I captured the exchange between them twice. And let's see, the first one was, what? I can't recall offhand, but let's see. I'm going to keep rolling back until I can find this thing. Yeah, well, there was that, right. The first one was a remarkable confrontation about, well, what have you been doing, essentially, which is, kind of exactly what you want to be asking about in these exchanges. I guess he started yesterday's press conference with essentially a propaganda film, a 3-minute video, campaign-style video, touting the accomplishments that he had racked up in, fighting strongly fighting the coronavirus, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't know, it was certainly the best spin that he could put on it. But she asked him, all right, you're hanging your hair hat, on having, as you say, closed the border to China, which we don't have a border with China, of course. But his thought was, I banned flights from China and I think in late January is when he finally got around to doing that, which, was fine, in terms of the timing. I actually don't know that I would subtract points from the layperson's point of view for having imposed a travel ban from China in late January, if only because most of us didn't know very much about the coronavirus. We hadn't heard very much about it. We didn't know anything really about how it spread. We knew kind of, sort of where it was coming from. So, whatever. His big thing is he's saying, well, first of all, the film and other points that they're trying to make just generally lie about what was going on. Their hope is that people will buy the spin of the video and the spin that they're using elsewhere now, which is that it was Trump who was the early, had the early understanding of the pandemic. Remember, of course, he has said, I always thought it was a pandemic. I thought it was a pandemic before anybody else said it was a pandemic. But I responded to it by doing nothing, but whatever. But yeah, their new spin is, well, Democrats in the media kept saying that this thing wasn't dangerous, it wasn't important, and downplaying the dangers of the pandemic. But only President Trump recognized the dangers and knew that something had to be done, which is, of course, the exact opposite of the truth of what happened. Although there were certainly people in the media who downplayed the dangers, for sure. They were mostly on Fox News doing the president's work for him there. And where they appeared on other networks, they were brought in essentially as contrarians, because the way our system works currently with the media is Fox News takes the Republican line and the Republican line only. Other networks insist on airing both sides to all of these issues, even when there's no two sides to air to these things, so that Republicans won't get mad at them. There's Republicans, it's designed so that Republicans will love Fox News and hate all the rest of them, and all the rest of them struggle mightily with putting moronic, contrarian Republicans on the air in the hopes that Republicans will stop hating them and love them like they love Fox News. But they're not going to love them like they love Fox News. They're just going to hate them. And if you point out to them, but we put your side on the air, they say, good, because that's the truth. You were, a broken clock, wrong twice a day. I still hate you, sort of thing. I don't know. There's my use of the internet phrase of the moment for that one. I don't know who needs to hear that, but there it is. I think we all understand that. So anyway, a good fight had by Paula Reed there, and not giving in to this idea that the president had done everything right and everybody else had done everything wrong, and she just put it straight to him. Your video says that you responded so strongly, but right in the video there's a 1 month gap in doing anything. Your own video, your own propaganda shows a late January supposed ban on flights from China, and we've talked a number of times already about how that was very porous. It was, as it turns out anyway, too late to have done anything about the spread of the virus to the United States from China. And, several thousand people came in afterwards, including more or less direct from Wuhan. And they banned, you banned flights from China, but not from other places. So people just flew from China to those other places to the United States, and you had nothing to do about it. And there was no testing in place, and there was no screening, even when you said you had screening in the absence of testing, and the screening was insufficient anyway. So the whole thing was garbage with respect to blocking travel from China. And then, even in the video, as she points out, and the entire month of February passes before anything else happens. And of course, by that time, we already had coronavirus all over the country, essentially. And we just didn't know it. But Trump, of course, would not admit to that and fought with her the whole time. And it was really an interesting exchange. I taped it. You've probably seen the exchange a couple of times. It's about 1.5 minutes, the critical parts of it. So I don't know if we're going to roll all the way through it. But, essentially she says, you say you took decisive action in blocking travel from China. That's not really true. But anyway, what did you do? with the time that supposedly bought you? In other words, you said, I'm going to close the country off from travel. That was your fantasy of what you wanted to do. It bears no reality with respect to what actually happened. But that's what you convinced yourself you did. So why did you do it? What did you do with the time you bought the month of February by shutting down travel? Did you prepare hospitals? Did you make a mad dash running around ordering PPE for first responders and medical personnel? Did you work on testing regimen, try to start the development of a vaccine, anything? What did you do? And he's caught flat-footed, of course, and so that part of the exchange was pretty amazing, too. What did you do with the time you bought? And then at first Trump says, I did a thing. It was in January. And what was I supposed, his big excuse was, what was I supposed to do? What would you have done was what he wanted to ask people. If there's no documented cases of coronavirus in the United States and, right, so no cases and no deaths. You're going to shut down the economy like we've done now based on zeros in reporting, at least in of cases in the United States, which was, an amazing trick to try because her question, what'd you do in February? I already told you there were no cases in the United States in January. I know, but I'm asking about February. No, you said January. No, you said January. I said February. What did you do with the time that you bought? You shut down travel on the last day of January from China. Then what did you do? And what did the administration do to prepare for this pandemic? And his only answer is a lot. And which basically led her to the name one thing moment, but she didn't actually use those words. But all right, what did you do? A lot. And some of it was already listed up here. We can get you a list. That was his answer. What did you do in February to help tamp down on the spread of this pandemic? I'll get you a list. Really? It's April 13th. We've known about, the world has known about COVID-19 since 19. So we're into the fourth month here. What did you do with the second month? I'll get you a list. Someone will write it down. Surely there's something. I'll get you a list. A lot. We did a lot. Some of it was already up here, which is, people didn't quite, I don't think, grasp exactly what he meant by that. He was sort of gesturing. He meant the video. And she got it right away. She knew exactly what he was talking about because she said, your own video shows you didn't do anything in February. There's a 1 month gap. You have a late January date about shutting down travel from China. And then the next thing that shows up is the end of February when you're, I think, closing down travel from other places. That's basically it. It wasn't until March 13th, I think at the March 13th, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a little earlier, maybe the 11th, but it was right around that time when the next response was, well, now the virus has spread to Europe, so I'm going to shut down travel from Europe too. And then he botched that, right? No one can go to Europe and no one can come back from Europe. No one, nothing, and not even the trade in goods is going to proceed in between the two continents. The exact opposite. Trade in goods is definitely going to happen. And he corrected himself the next day. And P.S. Americans can get back, but not green card holders, but then maybe also them. And also some people can come from, I don't really know what I'm doing, basically. So they ended up backtracking from that. And of course, the reporting over the last couple of days and the big weekend stories about how exactly and at what stages, various stages, the Trump administration botched their pandemic response. We've also learned that it isn't until mid to late March that the federal government makes its first orders. Somebody says, we should order a bunch of masks for the doctors in this country. I understand that's a problem. That's like 3 months too late. That's the whole point of having the pandemic plans. And the point of the big stories about, well, we briefed him or the intelligence services warned him, etc. The idea of warning him, it's not so he can hold his breath whenever he walks past the Chinese restaurant. It's so that he can start ordering masks and PPE. And I guess at that point you might have even known ventilators were going to be in demand. And you start doing things to prepare for the arrival of the virus. Instead, of course, they insisted that it was still possible to lock the virus in a box in China and just simply not let anyone in the world make their way from the most populous country in the world to the economic leader of the world. No one is in the whole of China and their billion-plus people is going to want to or be able to make their way into the largest economy on Earth, because why would they? What's so important over here that it's China, it's far away, just go stay there. That was never going to work. And the fact that they spend so much time hoping against hope that containment was something that they could do was lost time in the department where they really should have been working, the mitigation strategy. Another fight with Reid later on, actually over, what was it? The second fight was just as interesting and once again led to kind of a fine. Tell me what you're thinking, Mr. President moment. Yes, right. Someone else asked questions about, okay, well, given what's going on with China and how you tend to want to blame the virus on them, what are we doing about that sort of? How's trade, and did the concerns about reaching a trade agreement with China affect the way you handled things? And it certainly did. Anyway, she followed up and she said, basically, I'll take this hint. You seem very interested in punishing China or retaliating against China in some way. Why, given what you say about this thing, have there been no consequences for China? And that answer was pretty amazing too. Trump says, how do you know there's been no consequences against China? Well, because I'm watching and I haven't seen anything and you're not talking about that. And he says, how do you know there are? So, okay, so she says, all right, fine. What are the consequences? And his answer was, well, I'm not going to tell you. That was the most playground thing I've ever seen. And once again, this person's supposedly president. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see, it's been rather remarkable. Okay, I probably spent too much time on discussing the way this press conference went. Perhaps you have already seen these clips. It really was rather remarkable, and given there were so many different directions you could go with to be distracted from the totality of how bad this thing was. We've already forgotten to spend the bulk of the time on the fact that the President of the United States allegedly stood there and said he has total authority to do whatever he wants. And they actually asked Mnuchin about that. And they asked Pence about that. Do you agree that that's really the way things work? And Pence is just like, I stand by the president, what he says. And, he doesn't agree because nobody agrees because that's not the way things work. But you're not allowed to, contradict the president right then and right there. It was also, a lot of questioning about, are you going to fire Dr. Fauci? Because everyone was speculating about that. Trump pretended like it was nonsense and there was no basis for such speculation. And people just said, you tweeted it. And basically his answer to that, in case you were wondering, was that asked and answered and didn't find your way to an answer in that. He said, I don't know. That was it, basically. Why'd you retweet it if you're not thinking about firing Fauci? I don't know. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. He had no idea. And it might have been just that his people retweeted the thing and he had no idea. Or he may have retweeted it and had no idea what it actually meant. And, who knows? Anyway, we really, at this point, okay, he was terrible and tyrannical and it was an impeachable offense by itself, the press conference, and certainly should trigger the 25th Amendment, but it won't because reasons. So there you have it. But some very, good marks for Paula Reed and a few others who pressed him and didn't accept his non-answers or stupid answers at face value. But, he didn't cry or resign, so what are you going to do? Ultimately, nothing happens. All right. Other news. One particular bit that I saw just fly by, and I'll give you the headline on it, and really what more do you want? Although we're learning very often headlines don't match the facts and the stories, and it's been one of the hallmarks of the show that we dig a little further into it to find out whether this warranted this headline. But we'll just take this one at face value for the moment. CNN reporting 1/3 of NHS staff, the National Health Systems staff in the UK, and key workers tested in the UK have coronavirus amid concerns over access to protective equipment. This reported by Rob Pichetta of CNN. Only room for wiggling, only wiggle room here in the headline. That's room for wiggling, once again. That exists in here is 1/3 of the group of people represented by NHS staff and key workers, whoever they may be in whatever sector they may work, are testing positive for coronavirus. Probably not the case that 1/3 of the NHS staff have got coronavirus, or even that 1/3 of the NHS staff have tested positive, but rather this combination. So I don't know where these other key workers are working, but the point is still valid. Too many people who are important to the functioning of the United Kingdom have coronavirus. And, that's to be expected. They took a lame-ass approach to everything. We discussed the difference between the way Ireland and the UK approached things yesterday. I had to stop in the middle of that thread, but there was a whole second section that runs pretty much like I bet you could have guessed at that point, except the focus was testing. That once again, the Irish were extraordinarily broad and aggressive in their testing, and that has helped, and that the UK was lacking and lackadaisical in their testing regime, and they're paying the price not only in 2.5 times the death rate from the virus, but now finding that 1/3 of NHS staff and key workers who have been tested anyway have returned positive results. There's been a lot of that going on. And where tests are administered, poof, you're finding out that lots of people have this coronavirus. Other news from overseas, my pocket recommendations is really pushing this one on me, so I thought I'd at least read you the headline. We did hear the other day about Sweden calling a halt to its trials of Trump's favorite miracle drug. What is it? Hydroxy. I can't even remember what the rest of the medication is called. It was not quinine, but I guess a hydroxyquine or hydroxycoquine, or I can't remember what the hell the name of it is, but I guess all I remember is the hydroxy, and it was based on, I guess, quinine, which is the old original anti-malarial drug. And I mentioned the dangers of anti-malarials in general. I wondered if Greg was going to pick up on that or not. We didn't have a whole great deal of time for that. Maybe he wants to discuss that in the near future, but I'll drop some hints on those while we're going here. But this is a different story about Sweden. The Time magazine story that's being pushed very hard on me by the Pocket folks. Sweden's relaxed approach to the coronavirus could already be backfiring. You didn't want to hear that. And we had hoped, I guess, that Sweden was taking a very nice democratic socialist approach to everything and handling everything in a fact-based way and surviving the pandemic as a result. But I guess not necessarily the case. How relaxed are they? Let's see what Melissa Godin has to say about this in Time magazine. Starts off in narrative form here when Chloe Fu, F-U. No, really. That's how she spells the last name, F-U. I'm not saying anything. I'm not censoring myself here. That's wow. Okay, well, she's 24 years old, and so, she's probably heard the joke already. Anyway, when she went for a run Monday evening, the streets of Stockholm were filled with people drinking on restaurant patios, enjoying the first warm day of sunshine after a long winter. And that's some serious winter, I would guess, in Stockholm. When you walk around, there's total and utter absence of panic, which is a good thing by itself. That's what Fu says, who moved to Sweden from the United States last year. The streets are just as busy as they would have been last spring. Or last spring, I guess is the way you would emphasize that one. As many public spaces throughout Europe empty out, with citizens only leaving home for essential groceries or medication, life in Sweden is carrying on mostly as usual. Children walk to school while adults meet up for dinner at their local bar. Only the vulnerable have been advised to isolate, and some are working from home, which sounds an awful lot like what Trump originally wanted here for the United States, something like what Boris Johnson wanted for the UK, and we've seen how that's worked out for those two countries. Now in Sweden, where there are 9,141 confirmed cases and 793 people have died, experts worry weaker measures may be leading to more severe outbreak in the country of just 10 million citizens. Sweden has a relatively high case fatality rate. As of April 8th, 7.68% of the Swedes who have been tested or who have tested positive for COVID-19 have died of the virus. Neighboring countries like Norway and Denmark have case fatality rates of 1.46 and 3.85%, respectively. The U.S. case fatality rate is about 3.21%, according to this April 9th article, although my own calculations from the Worldometer's coronavirus section is that those numbers tell me that the fatality rate is about now 3.9%, rising to 4%, which is likely not the case because of the number of undetected cases out there, but we can't confirm them. All we have is the confirmed numbers, and we're running at near 4%. We discussed this yesterday, while the president's hunch that he told Sean Hannity about was that the true morbidity rate was a fraction of 1%. Now, that may actually even be the truth if you knew about how many people really had the coronavirus and had tested everybody and gotten an accurate read. You might find that less than 1% of the people who contracted the virus actually did die from it or from complications of other underlying comorbidities, however you want to put it. But because Trump wants to keep the numbers down, instead he can only have one number be down. Either the total number of cases, which he doubtless considers the most important of the numbers, or the death rate, but not both. You can't artificially force them both down without just lying, and maybe that's what's coming next. Anyway, Sweden's elevated case fatality rate could be a result of its low testing rates compared to its neighbors. Experts say Sweden's laissez-faire approach could also be to blame. So we're not sure whether it's screwing up the testing or just letting people do what they want that's leading to this problem, but it's at least one of them, if not both, and it probably has to do with both. And you can probably tell that that's the case because in this country we no longer have we don't have, generally speaking, the laissez-faire approach with social distancing, but we do have the lack of testing capacity, and we have the same problem. So anyway, that's basically what you need to know about what's coming in from Sweden. I was hoping for a little bit more of a picture of what's happening there, but I guess that's it. I don't know whether the restaurants are closed indoors, but they think it's okay to eat on the patios, or the restaurants are just not closed, period, or what. But there's some explanation offered here anyway from Swedish politicians about why it is that Sweden thought that they could actually do this, and there's no convincing reason offered. I guess they just figured, I don't know, we're Sweden and we get away with things. Well, apparently not. Anyway, let's see. Back over in Pocket, some other stories we should catch up on. I mentioned yesterday the problem of the Smithfield pork processing plant. Smithfield is a Virginia-based company, but this plant was in South Dakota, where they think they haven't had a lot of the virus, and they think of themselves as, chiefly rural and isolated from urban centers, and so therefore all the terrible evil things that happen in New York and Los Angeles, P.S. also everywhere else, just aren't going to reach them in sweet old heartland South Dakota. But it has reached them, because it's going to reach everywhere, and they have plenty of places where they concentrate their population. And lo and behold, in those places where they haven't practiced social distancing, they have an outbreak. And in fact, it's now one of the largest hot spots in the country. Isn't that amazing? What a headline for the South Dakotans who wake up to this one. Let me roll back and find the one that I retweeted earlier today. Where I can't, let's see. But anyway, essentially, it was just that once again, that South Dakota resisted social distancing, and the consequences of having done so is that they now have one of the biggest hotspots in the country. The governor there is Kristi Noem, and she's basically still in denial about this thing and insisting that, it shouldn't have happened because we are totally isolated and whatnot. Plus, we're South Dakota, and we don't have any of those icky, yucky people here. But it turns out that they do. It's just that they're the wrong color for the governor to care about. Here's the headline here from the Washington Post. South Dakota's governor resisted ordering people to stay home. Now it has one of the nation's largest coronavirus hotspots. That's a problem for a number of reasons, not least of which is the one I stated, that now they have one of the hotspots, but the people who are sick at this hotspot are the wrong color for South Dakota's governor to care about, so we're not really sure what she's going to do about it. But it's also your problem because Smithfield had to finally do something about it. The numbers are way, way up. Let me see. Are they in the top couple of paragraphs here? All right. Yes. Griff White, reporting for the Washington Post. As governors across the country fell into line in recent weeks, South Dakota's top elected leader, that's the governor, stood firm. See, she's so resolute. There would be no statewide order to stay home. Fine. She's playing it Trumpy. Such edicts to combat the spread of the novel coronavirus, Governor Kristi L. Noem, it's N-O-E-M, said disparagingly, reflected a herd mentality, which I guess is supposed to be, I don't know, I guess that's supposed to be a terrible thing, but South Dakota, they have so many herds there, and so many people depend on their livelihoods, for their livelihoods on those herds. You'd think they would stay away from that, but whatever. They're not very smart people sometimes. So Kristi Noem said that having a stay-at-home order was a herd mentality. It was up to individuals, not government. How do you like that? To decide whether to exercise their right to work, to worship, and to play. That right to play that everyone loves to cling to. Or to even stay at home. The right to stay at home. That's the way they were putting it. Anyway, and besides, the first-term Republican told reporters at a briefing this month, South Dakota is not New York City. Right, true. But it feeds New York City, and that's a problem. You see, because now South Dakota is home to one of the largest single coronavirus clusters anywhere in the United States. And the United States has a lot of coronavirus. We're, by the way, running at, I think, now nearing 4 times more cases than anybody else. We passed by 30, and I assume by today we'll be at 31% of cases worldwide. But by the way, when you look at the other side of the equation, unresolved cases, the cases all come out one way or another. They either die from it, or you recover from it, or you still have got it. They have a column at Worldometers for each one of them. How many people have tested positive? How many people have died, how many people have recovered from the coronavirus, and how many people are therefore are in neither column and are therefore active cases. The United States has 40% of the world's active COVID-19 cases. Not only do we have more cases in terms of raw numbers, and not only are we doing less testing than the vast majority of the developed world in per capita, essentially, but we also lag terribly far behind even the rest of the hard-hit Western world in curing people and getting them back on their feet. We have more people lingering in treatment than anybody else. We have 30% of the cases, 40% of the cases that have been contracted start to finish in this whole pandemic. 40% of the people who have contracted it and still have it and haven't been able to get over it or just die from it are in the United States. Now, as it turns out, the biggest cluster among this cluster-effed country that's got it is in South Dakota, where more than 300 workers at a giant pork processing plant have fallen ill. With the case number continuing to spike, the company was forced to announce the indefinite closure of the facility on Sunday. And here's the rough part: threatening the U.S. food supply. So we'll play some dramatic music for that. And it's true, and I don't know how many of you base your diets necessarily on Smithfield ham, but they're a big pork processor, and a lot of... remember the other day, what did we find out everyone was buying? Spiral ham, for whatever reason. Hair color, yes, eventually toilet paper, hand sanitizer, spiral ham. And now they're basically saying one of the biggest pork processors in the country has to close down. Why? Because everybody who's been packing all the food that you've been buying at the supermarket and stuffing your refrigerators with and then eventually stuffing yourself with have got coronavirus. Now, I don't think that necessarily, I don't know how well the virus survives in that situation. I don't think that you've got yourself a infected spiral ham. I don't know whether Smithfield handled it or not, but even if they did, I don't know if the virus survives in that kind of environment. But it's not good, and people can't pack spiral hams competently and sanitarily, safely, freshly, etc. if they're dropping like flies from coronavirus. And especially not if they're sneezing all over it, for instance. Anyway, now, I guess, some other people there in South Dakota disagree with their brilliant governor. A shelter-in-place order is needed now. It is needed today, said Sioux Falls Mayor, that's a big city there for them, Paul Tenhaken, T-E-N, capital H-A-K-E-N. Some Dutch people, I guess, could help me out with that one, whose city is at the center of South Dakota's outbreak and who has had to improvise with voluntary recommendations in the absence of statewide action. But the governor continued to resist. Instead, she used a media briefing on Monday to announce trials of a drug that President Trump has repeatedly touted as a potential breakthrough in the fight against coronavirus. It's an exciting day, she boasted, repeatedly citing her conversations with presidential son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He's a busy guy. So what she's saying is, and I guess they get around to telling us finally in the end here, but Greg noted in retweeting the excited tweet from the governor that there it is, there's the word I'm looking for, hydroxychloroquine has been ordered by the governor. She tweets, I made direct requests to the president, using the POTUS and VP Twitter handles, to Trump and Pence to supply us with enough hydroxychloroquine so that it could be made available, whatever that means, for every hospitalized person in the state, as well as for those healthcare workers on the front lines and those in the most vulnerable populations. However, no one knows whether it will do anything. But Greg asked the important question that he told you was key to the whole thing yesterday. Explain your distribution system. And I'm sure that there is none. And I'm sure in her mind, she goes on to tweet, we've received the initial doses we need thanks to the leadership of, she thanks Sanford Health with assistance from Avera Health and Monument Health, whatever. We're now the first state to do a full clinical trial to test whether hydroxychloroquine can treat and perhaps prevent COVID-19. So more dead and injured people on the way for South Dakota. Well done. Lots of people pointing out that, there are huge problems with it, whatever. Greg pointing out that they're going to have to work something out in terms of distributing this stuff. They're going to give it to hospitals, and then what are the hospitals going to do? The hospitals, last time this sort of thing was offered up when he gave us the example of the Tamiflu drug during, I guess, the H1N1 flu pandemic. Hospitals said, we don't want it. By the time people get to the hospitals, it's too late for Tamiflu to do anything about it anyway. And the people that can help are the very people we want desperately to stay away from the hospital at this point. The people who have either just come down with the flu or are worried about catching it and want to get the Tamiflu, let them get it elsewhere. And then they found out they have problems of, who is it paid for? Has it been purchased from the pharmaceutical companies that supplied it? If yes, who's got a distribution system that can handle just getting free product dumped on your lap? That is, that I guess require, I don't know, does Tamiflu require a prescription? Maybe not. Anyway, just getting all this stuff dumped on your lap and say, I don't know, give it out for free. And pharmacies saying this, hospitals saying this, doctor's offices saying, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? Who am I supposed to give it to? On what basis do I give it out? If it's already paid for, I'd give it out like Halloween candy. Where am I going to store it? Who's going to come to me in time for Tamiflu to even be of value to them? We don't even know what the value, if any, of hydroxychloroquine actually is. I suppose if you're holding clinical trials in a hospital setting, in a teaching hospital setting, I guess then maybe that's their distribution system. But I don't know. It's a good question. We'll have to follow up and see whether anybody reports getting this stuff fed to them and whether or not they lose their sight afterwards or have heart palpitations or whatever, which has caused the trials conducted elsewhere in the world, including lackadaisical Sweden, to cease their trials and cease their work. And maybe now they'll say, well, sure, Sweden gave up on the trial. People say that that's important, but look at how lackadaisical they've been about enforcing social distancing. So who cares? What are we taking advice from them for? We should be talking to people who know what they're doing to have these trials. Like Kristi Noem, who says, we don't need to shut down, except we got to shut down. All right. Well, there you have it. Let's see. I also got sent another link through Twitter from Mars Farmer 75. All right. Mars Farmer 75 sending us this interesting piece all the way from Providence, Rhode Island. A link to a piece about Smithfield, which is sort of interesting, from the Virginian Pilot, the southeastern sort of Newport News, Norfolk, Hampton Roads area newspaper. Smithfield sent so much pork to China last year. How much pork did they send to China last year? So much pork that it ran out of freezer space. Not China, but Smithfield ran out of freezer space. Gordon Rago, R-A-G-O, of the Virginian Pilot. This February 6th, 2020 piece. Interesting. What can we glean from this? Smithfield Foods shipped so much pork to China recently that the only thing stopping it from sending more is the company ran out of blast freezer space in the area, according to the Port of Virginia's chief sales officer. This would be their Virginia operation. The ramp up in shipments from the Virginia meat plant can be tied to the African swine fever. How do you like that? Which over the past 2 years, I haven't heard anything about it, has led to the decline of about 40% of China's pig population. China had about half the global pig population. It's also the world's top consumer of pork. Smithfield, now of course owned by China's WH Group since 2013, wouldn't say exactly how much meat it sent to China, but the answer is all of it. No one from the company was made available for an interview on Wednesday, back in February when they did this article, and an outside public relations representative wrote in an email to the Virginian Pilot that volume data is not publicly available. Okay. But an outside analyst said Smithfield dominated the export field last year, beating out competitors Tyson and Swift. Smithfield sent roughly 38.8 million pounds of pork to China between June and September, according to Panjiva, Panjiva, a division of S&P Global Market Intelligence. That's what we've got to do. Using an average slaughter pig weighing 230 pounds, that translates to roughly 168,701 pigs. All right. Well, that's important data to have somehow. I'm sure it makes sense, but I'm not sure where that fits in the in the entire spectrum of things. But it seems important and worthy of note that well, let's see. One, here in Virginia, Smithfield is busying itself sending literally as much pork as it can slaughter and freeze to China. China, in the meantime, we ban their travel, but somehow 40,000 people get through. Probably has to do with something like they're owning huge stakes in American companies and having lots of important business to do here, most of which, probably ends up paying Donald Trump in one way or another. Approximately 14 million Chinese citizens are members of Mar-a-Lago, for instance, and have free access to that site. But their South Dakota plant, which I guess probably provides more of the American consumed pork than the Virginia plant does, since the Virginia plant was sending it all to China, is now closed. So the Chinese, I guess, are still getting their pork, and Americans won't. So that's an interesting upshot, one that I hadn't really anticipated from coming out of the coronavirus stories. All right, just wanted to give you a sort of the total picture of what's going on across the entirety of the Smithfield product line, and now we're up to speed. We'll be back in a minute to enjoy some limited number of pork products, I guess. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right. Well, now that you know what's going on in the pork processing scene here in the United States, you might as well make some mention of maybe the biggest political story of the day. But I don't know. Maybe you don't want to hear about it. The results are in, as Greg promised us, and he'll certainly have something to say about it tomorrow. But the results are in from the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. You have doubtless heard by now that despite efforts to suppress the vote in every way they ever thought possible, plus the brand new way of forcing people to go out and stand in line in particular in the city of Milwaukee at just 5 polling places in the middle of a pandemic, in the hopes that the Democratic voting centers would see their numbers suppressed so that the incumbent Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Dan Kelly, appointed by Scott Walker to the seat, could retain that seat. The opposite happened, and in fact, the Democratic candidate, Jill Karofsky, has won instead, and won in more than convincing fashion. I guess you would have to say landslide fashion, which has got everybody excited, rightfully, because in the face of the most serious, concentrated, and coordinated voter suppression efforts the Republicans have mustered to date, with an assist from a pandemic, they still got crushed. So that translates into the hope that the same will happen in November, and that we, have an election and all of those things that are generally assumed when we talk about what might happen in November. But it's okay. There you have it. Amazing result, and congratulations to no end, except, I'm going to end them right about here, to everyone who organized on this election and pulled off an amazing win, especially in the face of all of this adversity. And I hope it is replicable nationwide, and that the results are the same, and that we sweep these people out of power once and for all, forever, and their party collapses and they never come back. Why not, right? we can celebrate. This was a tremendous win, and I would like to recognize that, and I just don't think I can do it justice on the show. So listen to the Wisconsin podcast to get all of the excitement that should be coming out of this that you're not going to get from me. I'm happy that they did it, but I have so many other things to tell you about that I feel like I want to move on to some of those things. Let's see. I know I've got a bunch of things parked here, and I got at least 2 notices via Twitter from listeners on this one. And let me bring them both up so that I can credit everybody here, because I like it when you guys send in these important notes that it means you've been listening to the show, and it means you want to see us back on the right track here. Let's see. First of all, Brian, who tweets as TomJode84, has sent this note attached to the tweet of Trevor Bedford, who is identified here in his Twitter profile as a scientist at Fred Hutch. That's at Fred Hutch, a Twitter handle, which is what? Fred Hutch is the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in, in Seattle. So a research lab, one of their scientists, Trevor Bedford, a blue checkmark kind of person, tweets, and this tweet was also sent on to me. I guess here at this stage, I will take note of Patrick Snyder sending this one on. Patrick E. Snyder on Twitter, if you'd like to follow along. He also saw Trevor Bedford's post. Both of them sent them on. The tweet says, "There's a lot of Twitter chatter." That's very alliterative. Twitter chatter. Or maybe it's just a rhyme, not alliteration, rather. But okay. Surrounding a rumor that circulation of COVID-19 in California during the fall of 2019. Remember, we discussed this possibility. Lots of people are talking about it, and it's true. Many people are talking about it. That's how come there's Twitter chatter. So you remember this. Lots of Twitter chatter surrounding a rumor that circulation of COVID-19 in California in fall of 2019 has resulted in herd immunity. This is empirically not the case, says Trevor Bedford. COVID-19 was first introduced into the USA in January/February 2020. Start of an 18-tweet thread. But we did say, there were some scientifically inclined institutions that said that they were undertaking to study whether this had been the case. And I don't know whether they have concluded their studies, but Trevor's argument is that they're barking up the wrong tree based on other evidence, and perhaps we should share that evidence. It didn't sound implausible, but I guess this tweet thread is designed to make it sound that way, and we'll see whether we agree. He's a scientist, after all. And Fred Hutch, whatever. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. That's not the most authoritative sounding Twitter handle, to be honest, but what are you going to do? He was a good guy, Fred Hutchinson, and everybody, I guess, right? Who else funds cancer research? Oh, well, actually, the Koch brothers do, but screw them. Anyway, Trevor Bedford is clearly not one of those people. He's one of the good people that research cancer, which is, I guess, most of them. We have a couple of good sources of evidence here, he continues. One, direct testing from, I guess, really by the Seattle flu study, which has its own Twitter handle and everything. And you know what it is? It's Seattle flu study, in case you want to follow along. We have a good couple of sources. One is direct testing by the Seattle flu study in the samples collected in January and February of 2020, when they were chasing down the coronavirus specifically. And two, phylogenetic, did I get that right? Phylogenetic evidence showing genetic relationships of sequenced viruses. And now you're getting into genetic evidence, and that's pretty tough to refute, I think. So, for one, the Seattle flu study has gone back and tested retrospective samples collected between January 1st and March 10th in our research assay. Am I pronouncing that one right? Assay, right? It's like SA with an A at the front. That's their research scientific term of art here. But these samples were collected as part of our study of respiratory infections in the Seattle area. All samples were from individuals suffering acute respiratory infection, with a subset having influenza-like illness. Individuals with undiagnosed COVID-19 should be picked up with these symptom criteria. We tested 3,600 samples collected in January of 2020 for COVID-19 status and found 0 positives among the January samples. 0 positives. We tested 3,308 samples collected in February and found the first positive on February 21st, with a total of 10 samples testing positive in February. So in other words, they still had all these samples that they had taken of people who had acute respiratory issues in the Seattle flu study area, which I guess would have included California, since they were talking California at the beginning. But anyway, basically they still had their samples around, and they said, all right, so if there was COVID-19 in the area in January, it'll show up in these samples. We saved them. Terrific. Apply the test. 0. No COVID-19 in January. And one, or at least the first one that actually gave them a positive, February 21st, with a total of 10 samples testing positive in all of February. That's pretty strong evidence that whatever it was that was circulating in California and the West in the fall of 2019 and into January and early February 2020 just wasn't the same thing as this novel coronavirus that we're talking about here. Something else. I'd like to know what, especially for all the people who lost their sense of smell and taste during that period, or if they did. Maybe they just misremember. Additionally, we confirmed that these samples from acute respiratory infections from October 2019 through February 2020 contained a variety of different viruses, including influenza, RSV, rhinovirus, metapneumovirus. Oh my goodness, it's getting progressively worse. Oh no, this one's easy. And seasonal coronavirus, the other kinds of non-novel coronaviruses, one we knew about already. As you may know, seasonal coronaviruses are responsible for about 30% of common colds and are easily distinguished from the one we're worried about here, the full name now, the SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID-19, of course. So yeah, seasonal coronaviruses are responsible for most and are easily distinguished from the coronavirus we're worried about here in molecular assays. There is no chance of confusion between these in our study, our assay. I'm going to just go with I'm afraid I'm mispronouncing it, and so we'll just go with it. All right, or I'll just continue to mispronounce it, and you ignore it. It's empirically true that the Seattle flu season in October through January was, therefore, not the result of COVID-19. We would have seen it in these data. There's no opportunity to disguise itself or wear a cloaking device of any sort. If it's there, the genetic testing will find it. It's not there, basically, is what he's saying. We would have seen it in these data. Given travel connections between Washington and California now, right? He's not actually, I guess that means we're talking about what? That, all the samples were for the Seattle flu study. And I said, well, what about California? We were talking about California. Here's where California comes into it. They were testing only people in the Seattle area. And that is a significant distance from California, or at least certainly from Southern California. Even from Northern California, it's a pretty significant distance. So where does California come in? We found none of the COVID in any of the samples up until late February. And if it's not there, then it wasn't in Seattle. Now, given travel connections between Washington and California, there is no way that COVID-19 was widely circulating in California, but we end up seeing 0 cases of COVID-19 in Washington to this point. You see, the likelihood of it being widespread enough in California that there's herd immunity, but no one takes it to Washington somehow until February 21st, I don't think so. For another thing, he adds here, the genetic relationships among sequenced viruses reveals their transmission history as described here in an article at nextstrain.org. You can imagine what that place is about. The SARS-CoV-2 accumulates genetic changes at about 2 per month along a transmission chain. It's getting a little technical, but I think you can all work out what that means. We can use the number of genetic changes observed in a viral lineage to estimate the date of its common ancestor. There have been hundreds of viruses sequenced from infections in the USA. We can use these sequences to date the arrival of the epidemic. Doing so, we see that there were multiple introductions driving the U.S. epidemic, and the earliest was in January. This too linked over to Next Strain. There were multiple paths that the virus took to reach the U.S. There wasn't one patient zero who carried it over and started the whole thing, right? There was a direct introduction from China that occurred in late January, and there were multiple introductions from the European epidemic that occurred during the course of February. So it was coming from all over the place, and whatever, even regardless of where it started from. And I guess that, by the way, taking you back to the earlier part of the show, answers the question about the efficacy of the late January, not very effective and thoroughly porous so-called travel ban from China. It just wasn't going to do the trick. It was never capable of stopping the spread of the virus because it was coming from Europe as well. It was here by February, and there was no action taken against European travel until a month later. If we restrict to viruses sampled in California, Trevor says, highlighted here as larger yellow dots in his 2 diagrams, which you'll have to take a look at for yourself, we see that they fall in with the rest of the U.S. epidemic. There is no chance that SARS-CoV-2 was circulating in California in fall of 2019. Circulation in California started in January or February of 2020. Genetics tells us as much. That's what he's saying. Estimating the total number of infections is difficult without serology. See this thread. He sends people to his own earlier thread on Twitter here about that subject. But I'd guess that we're catching between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 infections as a confirmed case. In other words, as people have been discussing all along, there could be 10 to 20 times the number of people who are in fact positive for coronavirus in the country, above and beyond the, well, let's go take a look at the Worldometers number, above and beyond the 587,815 so far confirmed in the United States. If it's 10 times more, of course, then we're talking about 5.8 million people infected in this country. If it's 20 times, of course, we'd be talking well over 10 million infected people in the country. And honestly, if Trump wants to be right about the morbidity rate, he's got to hope that that's actually the case. Although we'd hate to think about it, but it's certainly starting to look like it's got to be something like that, or else we are running Italian-level morbidity numbers on the much lower numbers of people confirmed to have it, which is, in Trump's mind, the more important of the two numbers. And I mean, it's just an amazing thing to think that what he wants here is for us to magically have fewer people infected, but that the so-called greatest healthcare system in the world is, in fact, no better at reacting to pandemic than I guess what Trump types would dismiss derisively as old Europe, or for that matter, the socialized medicine in the UK, which they're constantly deriding. All right. Well, that's pretty amazing all by itself. So Trevor says, well, I guess we're catching about 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 infections as a confirmed case. He's included his own tweet from April 7th here to illustrate the point. How can we assess the total number of SARS-CoV-2 infections that have occurred up to this point? As others have noted, it's not easy to extrapolate from confirmed cases to total infections, but some thoughts in the thread he links to, but no real answers. So why read it, right? Just hinting, though, at exactly why it's so hard to nail down how many people probably actually have this stuff. This estimate, of course, would give 5 to 10 million infections in the U.S., or about 2 to 3% cumulative prevalence. This is a long way from the 50%, I guess, that they were worried about, 50 to 66% that we would need for herd immunity. What would it actually take, right? So here we are, we're sitting here, as it turns out, things are terrible as it stands. Plus, they could be 10 to 20 times worse than they really are. But even if they were that bad, we would really still only be talking about 2 to 3% of the population actually having it. And in order to get to herd immunity, letting it wash over the country, having herd immunity like Boris Johnson proposed, we would need not 2 to 3% to actually have this thing, but 50% of the country, even 66% of the country to have herd immunity. That I don't think we want to gamble with, given what our morbidity rate has ended up being, by our best estimates anyway. Let's see. Trevor continues, I see test, trace, isolate hashtag as the only real solution to the problem we're facing. And he's got another thread that he refers you to here from Firefox with 2 X's, 66. That's Dr. Emma Hodcroft. In case you were wondering who's got that amazing online name, Firefox 66. Well, it's a doctor, so don't get too carried away with yourself thinking that it's not somebody you have to listen to just because it's a goofy handle. So anyway, he says, test, trace, isolate, which they've turned into a hashtag, is the only real solution to the problem we're facing. And I think we're all rapidly reaching that conclusion. I know I did see earlier in the day, it was Garance Frank Ruta, right? I think tweeting similar thoughts that, like, really, look, oh yeah, she says the single most important thing we can do to quote unquote reopen the economy is to provide widespread antibody testing in New York City and elsewhere, of course. The death rate here in New York is 1% then, based on current deaths. She says, if the death rate is actually 1%, which I guess people were hoping it was, then based on the current deaths in New York alone, nearly 700,000 people in the city have had the infection, not the 100,000 that they've documented. And the bad news, I guess, here for Garance is that 700,000 would probably, well, I guess it would be right in the middle of that, and between 5 and 10, or actually 10 to 20. I'm sorry. Now that I look back at it, Trevor's estimate would be, if the same metrics apply in New York, that we're only catching 1 in 10 at minimum, somewhere up to 1 in 20 perhaps, of infections with our testing, although maybe they've been testing at greater density in New York. But you could have 1 million to 2 million infections, not just the 700,000 that they've got here. But Garance was saying, if the death rate is actually 1%, based on current deaths, then just extrapolating backwards from that, 700,000 people have had the infection in New York City. But what if the death rate is actually higher than that? Well, I don't know. Then that changes the number here. But I don't know how accurate a projection point that is versus the way Trevor does it. But the upshot of this is a lot more people have it than we think. And if we reopen the economy, even as we understand that it's more than entirely likely, it's absolutely, well, it's certainly probable, if not almost absolutely the case, that hundreds of thousands or even millions more people have the virus than we know. And it is the asymptomatic carriers who are responsible for a great deal of, if not the bulk of the spread. Then we're just asking for an artificial round 2, even though we're likely to get a natural round 2 of the virus regardless, even if we do stay in social distancing and isolation. So it could be a pretty serious mistake to run away from the one thing that's working here. Anyway, let's see. Trevor thread continues on here. Test, trace, isolate is the only real solution. And you should see this thread from Dr. Hodcroft for further discussion of that. Alongside non-economically disruptive distancing and broad use of masks, Trevor suggests. By the way, Dr. Hodcroft's thread begins with this note, in case you're interested in tracing that through and reading it. As we all grow weary of lockdowns and restrictions, and in some cases, and some case counts seem to plateau, there's restlessness towards ending these to limit economic harm and, quote, get back to normal. Let me be very, very clear. Here's the answer you were looking for. There is no cheap or easy way out of this pandemic. Not even a wheezy way out of this pandemic, although it may be making a lot of people wheezy. There's no way out. You're trapped in it. And she explains this in her April 11th thread, if you care to follow that one. Which we can do now because we're into the thanks to all the people who helped contribute to Trevor's thread part of the thread. And then lastly, thank you to the groups all over the U.S. and the world who have generously shared sequence data via this, the Twitter handle for this organization, GISAID, GISAID, which surely stands for something important and scientific, and you should all like. And also the analysis from Next Strain, which also keeps a Twitter presence, in case you're interested in following along. No spaces, no nothing, just Next Strain. Real-time tracking of pathogen evolution. Probably over my head, but maybe some of the rest of you who are competent in this can follow along. Another note here from Athena 5000, from whom we haven't heard in a while, and I hope you've been healthy throughout all of this. By the way, has anybody in the listening audience had a run-in with the COVID-19? Let us know so that we can either send you good wishes or bowls of soup or whatever. Or if you are over it, give us all some hope. Some good stories about the eventual recovery. Even though we know that most people do recover, it would be nice to hear something personally. It would be better, though, to have everybody just say, nope, I'm doing okay. So that would be great news. All right, but here's what Athena had to say. My nephew is an employee of Smithfield in Smithfield, Virginia, and they just got over a flu outbreak there in December of 2019. My nephew had it twice. That's another one of those sort of anecdotal stories that's making everybody wonder. My own family has reported, I've got a brother in Denver area. I don't know. You know what? I haven't been out there, so I don't know. But in Colorado. But yes, suburban, not an urbanite, but who, when the coronavirus outbreak, scared everybody for real, such that we finally all began talking about what's been going on health-wise. Yeah, he mentioned, he and his wife both had come down with a pretty severe flu earlier on, and that they felt, what if this too was an early coronavirus outbreak? Though this was in the fall and early winter, but that, again, they had come down with the flu twice, which is an unusual occurrence, I think, for most people. So to find out that this is happening, just anecdotally, again, to others as far away here as Smithfield, Virginia. But therein too is the difference for all the people who, I don't know, for whatever reason might still be clinging to the idiotic idea that this is just like the flu, and wondering, well, we don't close down the country for the flu. Why are we closing down for this? Well, here you have it. People got the flu twice in Smithfield, and they never closed. They had a problem, but they got over it. Now, this thing has them shutting down. It's totally different. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com.
No, I didn't want to do that.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And Joan McCarter joins us for our final segment. And we're just working out, okay, well, what are we going to talk about? And this is great. I love it. This is the good part. You're getting a preview of what's coming up, what she's working on next. So you get sort of the exclusive inside view. It's like Entertainment Tonight, but yeah. I don't know.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. How are you? Everybody is still healthy in your home and in your area, hopefully. And,
as far as I know, I
yes,
haven't heard otherwise, so
that is good news.
We're hanging in there.
I was just, updating. I got a text in the break from my dad that he's up in northern New Jersey, where it's one of those situations where everybody knows somebody. So we had the second person on my block where I grew up has died from coronavirus. A track coach from high school has died from coronavirus. It's well, what can I tell you? I'm glad I'm not in the middle of all that there now. But New York metropolitan area has got it unlike anybody else.
Yeah.
So,
well, except for the small towns of Bellevue, Haley, and Ketchum, Idaho.
Yeah, those little places. Oh, and now Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Smithfield ham packing plant. The rest of the city probably could care less. They have a number of, it's an immigrant population working in the plant. We'll get some more, I guess is what they figure. And probably there's people getting ready to protest treating the people who got sick in the first place. Send them back to wherever they came from, even if they were born here. You know how things are out in some of the wilds of Trumpy Republican. I would say west, but east too, like Florida,
yes,
or South Carolina, or everywhere. Yeah, or almost up until recently, like about 10 minutes ago, Maine. So, it happens everywhere.
Speaking of Maine, here's the one bright spot
take it.
in my week thus far.
I think I know
Susan Collins' 52% disapproval rating in Maine.
Wow.
Yay.
Yes, it's deep and concerning, that approval rating. So, okay, good news.
She has 37% approval, and in the same poll last fall, she was at 42% approval.
Okay.
So
Which
5
was not
points
good.
in, 3 months, 4 months?
All right.
I'll take it.
Yeah, good. We'll be rid of her sooner or later, and,
She has essentially the same approval rating in Maine as Donald Trump.
Okay.
That's even better.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible metric to have to measure yourself by, but I mean, they should be joined at the hip, and now in approval ratings, they are, which means something. It means people want you gone. So good. Eventually you will be. Come November, I guess that's it. Goodbye. But you have to go and vote in order to do that.
You have to go and
Even if you do it by mail, you got to do it.
To
Yeah.
a number of things. Vote by mail, saving the post office.
Yes, another problem if you're going to vote by mail.
And, of course, Mitch McConnell.
All right. Yeah.
I spent most of yesterday afternoon and a good part of this morning grappling with the big Jane Mayer story on McConnell in the New Yorker.
I think I saw one blurb from that. Yeah.
And it's as horrifying as you would think it would be because it's Mitch McConnell. And
yes.
he is kind of a sociopath.
Yeah.
The portrait that emerges is of not a megalomaniac in the same way that Trump is. He has the same megalomania. It's just less expressed.
I see what you mean.
He's smarter. He's
that ain't hard. But...
more secretive about it. But this is all about Mitch McConnell having power and keeping power.
Okay.
That's all he has ever wanted in life. And he has known that how he gets there is with money.
Yes.
So those are the two primary motivations for Mitch McConnell. Giving away everything to the base that has all the money, his base. Mm-hmm. Not, the great unwashed that loves Trump, but the bankers, the millionaires, the billionaires, the real estate moguls, the people with money.
Sure.
And having them keep him in power.
Yeah. Even if we don't know to what ends. Right.
He keeps giving them stuff, so they keep him there because they like the stuff that he keeps giving them.
Yeah.
For instance, in the Washington Post article I just popped over for you.
Got it.
A tax change that they slipped into the coronavirus package. CARES 2, or CARES 1 rather, the Coronavirus Aid Relief whatever, Economic Security Act, the one where, most of us get $1,200.
Yeah.
43,000 Americans will get a tax break of about $90 billion this year alone.
How many people? What?
43,000.
Okay. Well, even
okay, they're not going to get the whole $90 billion.
All right.
They'll get 80% of that.
When you're talking about $90 billion, that's quite a bit. So, I mean,
that would,
what is it? How do you get it?
Purchase an awful lot of PPE for.
Yes, I would think.
Most of what they would need to ride out this storm.
Yeah. What kind of tax break is it? What do you have to own to get one of those?
It's a fix that they've been trying to get from the 2017 law that was, making these people have to pay a little bit.
Yeah.
It suspends, and then it's taxes, and I hate talking about taxes and money stuff, but anyway, it's a little complicated if you're not one of the 43,000 people who understands how all of this works.
Yeah, or have an accountant.
It suspends a limitation on how much owners, I'm quoting, owners of businesses formed as pass-through entities can deduct against their non-business income, such as capital gains, to reduce their tax liability.
So you're not getting one of these, is what
So they created a limitation in the 2017 Republican tax law to try to make it look not quite so bad. And now that limitation's suspended.
I see. That's that is a lot of money. So let's see. I've whipped out the calculator here. $90 billion being given away here.
That's the loss to revenue to the United States.
80% of it goes
in 1 year.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is pretty big. So 80% of it goes to this smallish group. Now 80% of that is $72 billion. I've got the calculator going here. And you say 40.
Actually,
the
JCT, the Joint
they've already done this.
Taxes.
Okay.
Did this study on behalf of Sheldon Whitehouse, who noticed that they had put this in, is like, hey, what? Hey, wait a minute. They say 82% of the benefits of the policy
That's more.
go to about 43,000 taxpayers who earn more than $1 million annually.
That's a lot of people earning, well, not a whole lot, but a lot of people earning more than $1 million. Earning $1 million. Does that mean salary or just anything?
Whose tax, whose earnings, wherever they're coming from.
All right.
Are more than $1 million.
So 82%.
Less than 3% of the benefits go to Americans earning less than $100,000 a year. Because how many of us earning less than $100,000 a year have passed through entities?
What even is it? We learned once, so that we could follow this along, but that's not something regular people are doing very often. 3% of Americans do it, basically. Regular Americans. All right. So let's see. 82% of it goes to the $1 million plus people, which is just an amazing statistic all by itself.
About 43,000 people.
Yeah. So I got 73.8 billion of that goes to 43,000 people, all of whom earn more than $1 million a year. That just I figured I'd take out the calculator. That is a tax benefit of $1.7 million to each one of them. So these are people who already have, with this tax in place, they're earning, well, I guess after taxes they take out of it, but fine, they're earning over $1 million a year. Now they will have their taxes cut somehow by 1.7 million. Now, obviously, most of those people are earning more than that 1 million.
Right.
But that's pretty good. Now, so there you have it. Coronavirus for you, $1,200. For millionaires, another $2 million. Cool. That's if it's split evenly, which of course it isn't. And I guess somebody's getting $1 billion, and then the rest of the millionaires are getting 1.4 million. But that's obviously necessary. This is exactly who would need targeted relief in this moment. If you've been living in your panic compound, the whole house is a panic room. This will give you more, I guess, cement to slather on the outside so the zombies don't come. We should try that. So. Okay, well, buy stock in cement companies, I guess, or whatever. What do you spend money on when you're getting that kind of dollars? Nothing.
Yeah, they're
That's
not
the problem.
Using duct tape and plastic sheeting.
Yeah, I guess. I assume they already have it. This is really money. This is really interesting. So how many jobs will be created by sending millionaires an extra $1.5 million or more in tax cuts during a lockdown? How does that trickle to me?
It gives them more liquidity, Republicans argue.
Liquidity.
Because, everybody with $1 million dofinitely needs more liquidity.
Yes, they're having problems with it. Right. So look for, those of you in the listening audience, $1 million tips for curbside delivery, something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
That would probably be the way that would trickle down. Or dropping shrink-wrapped pallets of cash on the street corner because, it fell out of my pocket. Maybe that's how some of it could trickle down. I don't know how else it's going to get to the rest of us. But obviously that theory is out the window too. Right? You can't have trickle-down theory with a closed economy. And also, if you open it, still not going to get that. People have this thing about money. They put it in banks and keep it.
It makes that $1,200 one-time payment an even harder slap in the face.
That's pretty insulting. If you get it. I mean, we don't know really what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If you're making lots of money but not $1 million, you probably have a bank account and a direct deposit number. Steve Mnuchin says you'll get your $1,200 by Friday, so long as now we all have to log on to a website. All the things we've been taught not to do. Log on to a website that may or may not work, run by the government, and give them your bank account number. And don't worry, Jared Kushner's on the other end. But then maybe you'll get $1,200. But in the meantime, the rest of the Millionaires Club will get 1.7 million just from this one tax change, not to mention the others that were already in the works and that we already gave them in 2017. I don't understand what taxes they're paying, and unfortunately,
I know. I don't. I
I
don't. Do they pay anything anyway?
I guess
are
not.
they paying negative taxes now?
Right. That may be an answer.
This is going to be 170 billion to the national deficit for the next 10 years, which,
yeah. Well, that doesn't exist or doesn't matter.
Deficit.
Poor Joe Biden will have to deal with that because you know how we are about deficits. We believe them. So, okay. Well.
Now you're getting me depressed.
Oh, this is what did it. This was your story.
Next year is so going to suck.
Yeah, well, plus, by the way, you'll all have to pay back the $1,200.
$170 billion to the deficit for the next 10 years. Cheers! Yes. These people.
Just to
They'll
make it
be
worse.
fine. They'll be trying to figure out how to get tax breaks built in when there are people starving and dying on the streets.
Yes, they can.
If they can get a tax break out of it for their wealthy,
right?
I'm
deduct corpse removal from your expenses. I had to rent a bobcat, to plow the corpses off the street in front of my mansion. Well, it deserves a tax break too. Why should you have to pay for that out of pocket? Is the question. And I guess if some people, if they get their tax refunds in cash, then when they run out of toilet paper, then these guys it doesn't make a difference. So maybe that's the trickle down.
It won't break down in the sewer system, but that's somebody else's problem to worry about.
We'll all have to dive for it like Slumdog Millionaire or something, and see if we can come up with our trickle down that way. This is a good future we're building for ourselves, and and don't forget that the $1,200 that you get, you have to pay back next year. Just want to point that out to everybody. They get to keep this one. We have to pay ours back. So minus $1,200 to next year. That's good. What other cheery news have you got?
Sorry about that. I just,
right.
Yeah. So we have to have an election in November.
We should.
We have to have it because we owe it to the people of Wisconsin.
Yes, it's our turn.
Who went out in their masks, who went out risking their lives.
Yes. Thank you.
But it worked.
That's the good news. That's the bright spot.
In the final count in this Supreme Court judge's election that we've been following, Daily Kos endorsed the Jill Karofsky, who's the liberal Supreme Court winner. They're supposedly nonpartisan, but everybody knows in Wisconsin that they're partisan. Yeah. Anyway, she won by 11 points.
That's huge.
11 points. Which is going to scare Republicans enough that they will do everything they can to not have an election in November.
I guess so. And,
So we just damn well got to make sure it does happen. And at this point, I think it might take pitchforks and torches going after Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
Oh.
We got to hit the target that we can hit. We've got to aim at the people who have the best chance of swaying, and that's Democratic leaders.
Okay,
they
don't stick them with
anything to help any more Republican friends until we get vote by mail in November.
All right,
nation, no excuse.
Yeah, I mean.
And
we're going to need
the post office.
That too, obviously, part 2 of this. I think I keep forgetting that that's the other attack point. They say, all right, well, you can have vote by mail. There's just no post office. Oh,
yeah.
Right, so it costs you $11 to get your ballot FedEx to you, and $11 to send it back. So that'll be a pretty effective poll tax if they manage to pull that one off. How much trouble are we really talking about for the post office? This comes up from time to time. They say they're on the brink like everything else. Social Security is about to collapse. Well, no, it isn't. Post office about to collapse. Well, not exactly,
The,
but
the post office truly is.
okay.
That
That's bad.
worst case scenario, they have operating funds into June. They've been hit hard by coronavirus,
Yeah.
which is sort of counterintuitive because you think everybody's doing everything mail order, but it really has shut down a lot of mail systems.
I'm not getting as much junk mail, that's for sure, and I think that's the bulk of
Yeah.
their income.
Yeah.
Which,
So, one thing you can do, you can go to the Postal Service store online and buy a book of stamps. That'll help them.
okay, I need them. You can buy forever stamps, right? So,
But more help would be, for instance, if the 2006 law that Republicans pushed through as they were on their way out to force the Postal Service to pay pensions 75 years in advance. They have to have 75 years worth of pension funds saved.
yeah, I know. I mean, that was obviously they did it for that reason, but how did they even convince anybody that was a number that made sense? Even a Republican.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's... Yeah.
All right. Well,
they're trying to privatize. They've been trying to privatize the Postal Service. They've been trying to drive it out of business since forever.
Sure.
Because, Postal Service socialism.
Yes.
So, get that law repealed.
Yeah,
Let the
please.
Postal Service have actual operating funds that they can use now and bail them out. If we can bail out Trump properties, and, by the way, this tax benefit does go to a lot of real estate types, like, say, Jared Kushner.
Yes, right.
If they can get these tax breaks, then, damn it, we can fund the post office.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the money's there. We know what's happening to it. It's being delivered to the people who already had it. And a lot of them will get that refund by mail, as it turns out, which is unfair, really, quite honestly. Although I'm sure a lot of them will get it direct deposited. But still, that's... So they're funded through June, and Congress not coming back anytime soon, as I understand it. Maybe
Not
May.
that we've seen. I don't know what Steny Hoyer was doing yesterday when he sent out his whip notice that, of course, reporters get. I get it. Saying, unless there's an emergency, ding, 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 ding.
Is there one?
They're out until May 4th.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's misdirection. Maybe it's just, look, I don't know what we're doing, so I'll just put this out. And if
possibly misdirection. Is possibly their effort at playing hardball with Mitch McConnell, saying, if you want anything before May 4th, it's going to have to be something that we can pass by unanimous consent in the House. That's possible.
Okay.
At the very least, it's ham-handed. It really is a bad message to send and very, very poorly worded unless there's an emergency.
Yes. Yes, unless that's supposed to be a hint, like, something we're going to, obviously anything could be an emergency at this point because we're just living in an emergency.
Because this is an emergency.
But yeah, this is I don't know. I just did see something somewhere. Oh yeah, Politico piece that I didn't get to read yet, but I was looking at the headline. 5 increasingly hardball versions of the next stimulus. The subheader being, Democrats are starting to ask, what would Phase 4 look like if we played chicken with Trump? Like, as opposed to, I guess that's growing out of the threats from Trump saying, essentially he would veto anything that has a post office bailout in it or something like that.
He has said that.
Yeah. And people's reaction, that's a widespread reaction from political observers saying, make him do it. But okay,
make
of course,
him do it.
Make McConnell will do what he can to block him from having to do it. But even then, make him object.
More than making him do it, have a sense of urgency about it.
Well, yeah, that would help. I mean, that's part of making him do it. You have to do it, you see.
The lack of urgency is something that I'm really grappling with this morning and not understanding.
Yes. I mean, all we are left with is Nancy Pelosi works in strange and mysterious ways, maybe? Because otherwise, nothing. Yeah. I
mean, I'm the first person to try to give them benefit of the doubt. It's not working today.
Yeah. Well, we're all wondering when something will happen. And I guess if the post office is funded to June and they're saying we'll be back in May, or are they funded at the beginning of June or the end of June? The post office. I mean, now makes a difference because May is not a lot of time for the beginning of June and not really that much for the end of June either.
Yeah. By the way, we're still not testing all of the people we need to be testing. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we still have medical workers who don't have PPE.
Yes. And I imagine that's got to be driving them up the wall, especially now that the Wonder Boy, Jared Kushner, who last week was going to take on the additional assignment besides Middle East peace and opioids and whatever else he was supposed to be doing, was going to airbridge everybody the PPE they needed. And now we find out, you know what? I'm bored with that. I'm going to be on the Council to Reopen America or whatever. And which was also an amazing development. Trump names a 7-person council. 2 of them are in his household. Jared and Ivanka are on there.
None of them have any public health expertise at all.
That, right. Yeah, nothing. No, nobody knows anything about anything. And in fact, somebody said it's amazing overlap between the council that effed everything up last week is now the council to un-eff it this week, I guess. But I've never seen such a thing. Jared and Ivanka, I've never seen that on the same. What do they both need to be involved in this? And Kushner, you're supposed to be busy. I've never seen such, like ADHD government that this week. And Mnuchin, too, is on everything. They give these.
And Mnuchin's on everything, too. There's Mnuchin at least takes Pelosi and Schumer's phone calls.
Nah,
they do seem to have some kind of sway with him.
Okay.
The least worst person is Steven Mnuchin. And if you remember back to that picture of him with his wife in the Mint holding up the sheet of $100 bills, this is what we've got to work with. This is all we've got to work with.
He's stealing the gold from Fort Knox. He's the least worst guy we have. I've never seen anything quite like it, but imagine you're working in a hospital, literally possibly working yourself to death, no PPE, and the guy who said, I'll save you, but you didn't believe, now says, oh, squirrel, I got another thing to do.
Squirrel.
Right. He's got now I got to reopen America. Mnuchin, okay, they also put the sleeping guy. Wilbur Ross on it.
Wilbur Ross,
is on it. Which
back in, was it February? I think it was early February, January or early February, said that coronavirus is going to be great for the U.S. because it will create jobs.
I don't know. That's not even a good throwaway line. Like, okay, well, Republicans think everything's going to create jobs, but what? How?
No, it made no sense.
Right, and more slippers they're gonna make. I don't know what he sounds like.
Because everybody's gonna be at home.
Yeah, right. I accidentally figured it out. Okay, thank you. You're glad that I tipped you to it, and you got it. We got across the finish line on that one. I don't know, but at least he's Secretary of Commerce, Mnuchin is Treasury Secretary. They belong sort of on something like this, versus, how about my daughter and son-in-law? No. 15
million jobs she created.
That's true. She did do that, and so that makes...
In some universe.
Yeah, right. They lost them all. I don't know. I guess this Friday we'll have another something million of those jobs destroyed as people apply for unemployment benefits. We've left ourselves in an amazing spot here, Joan.
We have, and I apologize for that.
Hey, that's
I wanted to bring hope today. I have none.
And you didn't solve the mystery of Wilbur Ross's presence on the committee to reopen the Sago mine or whatever they're calling it.
First for everyone.
Yeah, that's good, and I could kind of get into that, and really we should all have a good pair, and he's the guy to bring them to us. So thank you for clearing that up, Joan. I appreciate it. And thanks also for all your advice in past weeks on living with immune-compromised people. I think you've saved a lot of people illness from coronavirus in the listening audience with your good advice. And we've all absorbed it by now. We could talk about the political items instead. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Well, that's what I'm here for, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're all guessing what the hell we're here for these days. But it makes it that much easier when we get to talk to you, so I appreciate it.
Stay safe, Kagro. Stay safe, everyone out there.
Okay, we'll talk with you next week. And, all right, time for us to wrap up now and hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.
From Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, let's squeeze in an international tidbit here. A comprehensive study by researchers at a consortium of Brazilian universities and institutes found the country has 12 times more coronavirus cases than is officially reported. Can you believe that people would undercount? Imagine that, with Bolsonaro and all that. Okay, stay tuned. Next.